Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my league starter for 3.20, which is going to be Lightning Strike Poison Occultist. And before I'll say anything else, I will address the elephant in the room, which is, isn't Lightning Strike dead? And the answer is for hit-based, kinda, but for poison it doesn't really make that big of a difference. Now the biggest nerf for clear was that Lightning Strike lost a lot of projectiles, so last league it got up to 8 projectiles, I think it was at level 21. You could also get even more if you wanted to from like quality or helm enchant. Overall it wasn't really necessary, everything over just felt kind of unneeded, unnecessary, but let's say 8 projectiles. The thing is, nothing really else changed. Some of the qualities changed, but this does not change its single target damage first and foremost. So this is a completely clear related issue. However, what does concern the single target damage here is the Withering Step nerf. Basically what people used to do is they would scale a lot of elusive effect to get the most out of Nightblade, and then with Withering Step on your left mouse button, every 2 or so seconds whenever the cooldown is up, it would actually reset the elusive, giving you permanent high effect uptime. And that is not possible anymore, meaning Nightblade gets a lot worse. Now why is this not really a huge problem for Poison? Well, first off, because you can use GMP to kind of sub in for the projectiles. Now you lose a link, but what usually happens when you use GMP on a hit-based build is not only do you lose a link, you also get a less damage multiplier, which is even worse. However, on poison builds, this multiplier does not stick because it says less projectile damage, which does not affect poison. As well as that, Lightning Strike already has really good single target damage, and against bosses, all you do is you gem swap. And I want to emphasize this. This is literally against pinnacle bosses, where you have time to swap out. You don't have to do anything during mapping. Now, the second issue is Nightblade, and that is not really a problem for us, because we're going Occultist and we're not going Crit. Now, there were a lot of Nightblade versions around that went Assassin, and it looked really good on paper, right? You actually didn't get as much damage over something like an Occultist as you think you did, and that's for a few reasons. The main reason is Perfect Agony is just absolutely dog shit. Like, basically what this node does is it gives you Crit Multi as an option to scale your damage for Poison, but it only does so as 50% of a value, which still sounds okay, but when you realize that, for example, since we're using the Pressurized Dagger, which we're going to go over later, which makes it so all damage from hits can poison, you could just run Elemental Overload for a free 40% more damage. Now, Elemental Overload in endgame usually cannot compete with crit, but when we're talking about like 50% nerfed crits, now that looks completely different. And the biggest thing about poisons is you already have so many absolute premium damage clusters that the crit nodes just kind of don't do anything. Like, it's actually really hard to fit all these crit nodes into your build without going, I don't know, like 3.5k HP or something, or completely neglecting your defenses. On top of that, Assassin got even more nerfed because you can't really do Mistwalker anymore. Because if you get Mistwalker, the elusive from Mistwalker, you can't activate Withering Step anymore, and Withering Step is your best way to get Wither stacks on enemies during maps. On top of that, Occultist means that you get Profane Bloom, which got buffed this patch. I want to remind people, this went from 40% to 50%, which is huge. So you get Explosions, which Assassin doesn't. And as well as that, this node still gives you +1 Curse, which means you don't have to Anoint Whispers of Doom, which means you get like 14% more damage with the Corruption Avoid. So overall, Assassin is not as good as you think it is. It is still good, don't get me wrong, you can totally do it. But if you compare the two, it is just completely unnecessary. Also, a lot of poison builds are way too focused on poison duration, and they don't even realize that poison duration at some points just has really harsh diminishing returns. And that's especially true for the just buffed temporal chains against bosses. I mean, just think about, what does poison duration actually do? If you go from 8 to 10 seconds, is that actually DPS that you can ever realize unless you're against like pinnacle bosses? Most of the time, no, which is also a reason I focused a little bit more on faster poisons, which also means you get faster explosions and better clear speed. Also, Val Lightning Strike did not get touched. I want to talk about this for a little. How important is Val Lightning Strike? Very, very important. It's arguably the best Val skill in the game, and it's also still on full projectiles. Still 8 projectiles. You can still put it down during a map. It's going to clear your whole screen. You can still put down 2 at bosses and completely annihilate them. Also, just to dispel some myths, because GG wrote this one pretty sloppily, removed 20% increased damage. Some people think it got nerfed or something. All this means is that on the normal quality, it used to have 20% projectile speed and 20% damage. That was the same quality, and now it's only projectile speed, which I guess is a nerf if you used exactly normal quality, which nobody did. You used Pierce or additional projectiles, in our case, Pierce. So yeah, nothing changed with Val Lightning Strike. Yeah, I just had to throw this out there because so many people were asking me why I'm playing a dead skill, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about, again, though, why Poison is actually really good for these kind of skills. You might have also seen Poison Molten Strike pop up over time. And that's because the thing that Lightning Strike and Molten Strike have in common is that they're both strike skills. They're both have a melee part and a projectile part. And this is mainly important because they can both use support gems extremely well on poison builds. First up, the GMP does not actually give you the less damage multiplier because you're not scaling projectile damage, you're scaling poison damage, which is quite nice. On top of that, there's two more. There's first up multi-strike, which says less attack damage, which is a huge DPS increase, right? Like if you look at this, this gives you like 75% more damage. I'm still not 100% sure if I actually want to use it because multi-strike does not work on the Val part of lightning strike. Overall, it is a very nice incentive though. It makes your mana cost a lot smoother and the build in general. And then we also have vicious projectiles. So vicious projectile here says supported skills have 10% less projectile attack speed. And the thing about both molten strike and lightning strike is that they are the part that spawns the projectiles is a melee attack. You don't get the less attack speed. So don't get fooled by the projectile part because PoB actually thinks you get 10% less attack speed, but you actually don't. For example, if you look at the melee hit here, this is the one that matters. You can see there's no change. On top of that, a huge upside is you're actually able to scale Profane Bloom way crazier than most builds can. Everybody who ever played a poison build with Profane Bloom knows if you have global chance to poison, your Profane Bloom actually becomes a poison machine as well. Then I have to explain the main weapon that we're going to use, which is a pressurized dagger. There's 3 versions of this. There's also the hollow point and the pneumatic. I think the pneumatic is the best one. This is the one in the middle. All that changes is they get a little bit less physical damage, which is not that important. You're mostly scaling Ellie. And yeah, this weapon makes it so all damage from hits with this weapon can poison. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that you always poison. It just means that you can poison. You still have to get a 100% chance to poison. What this allows you to use is flat elemental damage on effects or support gems or auras. Getting elemental damage is way, way easier than getting any sort of chaos damage unless you're running Covenant, which we're not because we want to be semi-tanky here. And one thing that's really annoying to understand in PoE is the way conversion works and the way something like, for example, poison works. Because poison is chaos damage, right? But if the source of the poison with that dagger comes from elemental damage, it works with stuff like elemental overload. The same, by the way, is true for stuff like elemental damage with attacks. Works as well, elemental damage. All of these work. For example, though, if you only had if you had cold damage here and lightning damage, and you get cold damage, only the part of the poison that was applied by the cold would work with the increased cold damage. So what this basically does is it gives us a lot more scaling options and it doesn't shoehorn us into Covenant, which is already huge. That's basically it for the dagger. In terms of nodes, daggers are definitely not as good as claws, but you do get this one mastery, which is incredibly good. 8% more damage with hits and ailments against enemies affected by at least 5 poisons, which is basically always. A lightning strike is not the most intricate skill ever, but basically you're striking the enemy and then you're also releasing these projectiles. So one big thing about lightning strike that still works to this day is you can actually hit enemies twice with the same attack. This was not patched out. I know there was a patch where they said something about this can't overlap anymore. It can still hit 2 times. What that patch was is it can't hit 3 times anymore. There was some weird occurrences where it can actually hit 3 times, but you can still hit times against a single target, which is also the reason why, if you look here, I have 2 in full DPS. Now, what you need for that is you need at least +1 strike skill. For example, early game, I'm going to go with an Ancestral Call right here, and later you get it on gloves. One problem here is that you cannot really get to attack clusters. This is the nearest one. And attack clusters will next patch have +1 additional strike. We can't really get that. We're just going to go with Ancestral Cry. It's better than pathing all the way here. And once we have the Eldritch implicit, it's all gonzo. Or theoretically, we get the Relic, right? There was a Relic with +1 strikes. But I mean, that's probably just me dreaming. You have to position yourself correctly in order to actually hit twice. Let's say the enemy is over there. You don't want to stand on top of him because what that means is your strike will hit and then your projectiles can't hit as well. What you want to do is you want the Ancestral Call, right? The extra strike to hit and also then your projectiles hit. So for example, if I hit here and your Ancestral Call would hit on the enemy, that melee hit hits, and then the projectiles that originate from you also hit. Now also, don't pay any attention to the items or the damage I deal. I've just threw this together in standard real quick. In terms of Val skills, Val Lightning Strike, I mean, it's basically just a totem that you put down and it just fires all over the place. It's incredible against single target. It's incredible at clearing. You can just here or there throw down one and it's going to clear the whole screen. You can even move on if you don't want to loot. Yeah, it's just Val Lightning Strike is probably the best Val skill in the game. Now, what are the biggest downsides of this build? The first one is you don't really get Fortify at all. You can't get here, right, at all. You don't want to use the support gem. You can't use the support gem, actually, because the support gem only affects melee hits, so your projectiles don't scale from the more damage at all. It is not worth it, which is why we go into some more tanky bits, like for example, we're going for lightning coil. This is also going to be our end game chest, and we're going to stack as much physical taken as elemental. Second downside is the leveling. Now, an occultist poison is always kind of annoying to level. If you are a new player, that is, right? Obviously, if you're a veteran, you will have no problems. You know how this goes. You basically go Holy Flame Totem, Purifying Flame, Flame Wall, right? You start right here, and you just kind of waltz through. From here on out, you don't really get much damage, so this is kind of awkward, right? Then you get here. So this whole section right here, just not that nice to play with. But then once you get Poisonous Concoction, you're here. You get the 300% increased damage on non-poisoned enemies. You take all the increased damage that you can get because poison nodes are kind of weird. You don't get much increased damage. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit in the leveling section, but not too much. That's why I wouldn't really recommend this for a new player. The leveling is just kind of awkward, at least until Library when you get Poisonous Concoction. Now, this can get a lot easier if you have a friend who just gives you one, but that would be kind of cheating, so we're also not going to do that on League Start. And the third downside is if you want to go Molten Strike, like which is the thing that I actually tested first, because of Val Molten Strike, I was kind of like, oh, that looks kind of cool. It kind of negates the downside of Molten Strike being bad at clearing, right? It's nice AoE, but the problem is you have very low strike range, and when we tried it out in game, it was just super annoying. And on Lightning Strike, this doesn't matter at all. In fact, on Lightning Strike, you don't want any strike range, really, because it means that against single targets, you have to stay further away to double hit, which is very awkward. But overall, yeah, I would still say this is a downside if you want to play the Molten Strike version. As for gearing, I made 3 POBs, early game, mid game, end game. Basically, it all starts off with getting one of these daggers. Once again, it doesn't matter which of the daggers. All 3 daggers are fine. There's also a new divination card, which can get one, but those are probably going to be rare, so I'm not going to count that. You need a way to get accuracy. Now, you could fix it on the tree. I just went with the easy route, like Hostage. If that's too expensive, I'm definitely going to go for something else. Helmet, pretty normal cookie cutter. Actually, maybe I should tone it a little bit down for the early game version. I just made this like today on stream. A tabby early, right, is going to be fine. Some attack speed on gloves, a little bit of movement speed on boots. You don't really have a way to get onslaught on this build, so it would be nice if you can craft on the onslaught movement speed. Overall, it's a little bit better until later. Get as much flat elemental and elemental damage with attacks as you can. A big one here is Mark of Submission. I want to make this clear. Do not, under any circumstances, go for Blasphemy. Not just because it has less effect, but also because you always want to have Profane Bloom up. It just only works against cursed enemies. So if there's enemies off screen, they're not going to get exploded. Only the ones around you with the Blasphemy, right? But with this on hit, it will always explode. It is incredibly important. And the thing with Mark of Submission is this can actually retain your original curse. So you can have a Despair with quality. That is way better than getting a level 1 from a curse on hit, because it got nerfed this patch, right? So Despair level 1 versus a Despair level 20 with 20 quality is a huge difference. And getting all that minus res is actually a pretty damn big deal. So I even have this in my end game POB. Maybe I'm going to find a better way to curse against mobs, maybe. For now, this is what I got. Ring, pretty straightforward. You want to fix a little bit of your strength so you can also use Steel Skin. As for mid game, the thing that matters the most to me is getting a Lightning Coil, because Tainted Fusings actually got buffed. It's now like we had in Scourge, and I remember back in Scourge, you can get a 6-link extremely easy for less than a Divine. Lightning Coil is also usually pretty damn cheap and not even rare at all. So that's what I'm going to do here. This is going to help our defenses a lot. Because we're on the right side of the tree, it's kind of sketchy to get Determination. So we're actually going to skip that. We're going to go full physical taken as Ellie. If I remove this, you can see what happens to your physical hit. It is absolutely insane. Then what changes is later you're going to have an open prefix, and then you can craft on hits can't be evaded. Just so you know, this still costs Exalteds, so this is not as expensive as it used to be. It used to be 3 Exalteds, which would now be 3 Divines, but it did not get changed, which is pretty funny. Now, as for a shield replacement for Lacoste, you want life, attack speed, and if you can, also craft on the effect of curses, which is very strong. On the helmet, at this point, we're going to take the Pierce. We had this on the early tree here, but you don't really need it anymore. We're going to get it back later with a Thread of Hope. Also, at this point, we're going to have 2 strike skills, which makes it so we don't have to use Ancestral Call anymore. Even +1 is totally fine, which is going to be cheaper. As for boots, yeah, just at this point, get your spell suppression capped. I don't know if I am in this tree. I actually am. Okay, cool. The Ami, at this point, you want a Corruption Anoint, which is just black oils. Should be pretty easy to get. Mark of Submission, nothing here. This is basically now a Stygian Vice, because all the flat damage from a Murderer's Eye Jewel actually counts towards your poison. And I guess this I have to change. I probably wouldn't have a Taste of Hate yet. Let's just put a Granite Flask in. For now, let's see where our defenses are at. Should still be fine, yeah. Taste of Hate is going to be more important later against small hits. A granite does as well. We're also getting Transcendent Mind, because up here we're pathing through a lot of intelligence, and this is incredibly good. This gives you dot multi per unallocated intelligence in the radius. Other than that, we're just looking for attack speed, maximum life, damage with poison, time multiplier. Attack speed is definitely something you want to get just to make the build feel better with multi-strike, and we don't have that much attack speed in the build to begin with. And in the endgame tree, obviously, we have a lot of Awakened Gems. I didn't put in Awakened Multi-Strike and Awakened GMP. I don't want to make like a 200 Divine tree here. These are just the affordable Awakened Gems and stuff like that. On our dagger, on top of everything we had, we're also getting dot multi if we can, right? We're going to craft that together. Let's see how it goes. On our shield, we want the 30% reservation efficiency. This is really strong because it makes it so we actually don't have to take charisma, and every point on this tree is incredibly valuable. Now, I might actually go back to charisma later and add something, but I didn't really find anything that was super strong. We can't put another 50% aura, and at 25 or 35, there wasn't really anything interesting. Other than that, at this point, you're probably going to get a +2. This league, it's going to be really easy to get +2s. Like it was in Scourge, because Tainted Fusings are OP. If you can get a Blizzard Crown, that's huge. You don't care about the treats cold res because you're poisoning, right? You only get the upside from the added cold damage. And if you can, the nearby enemies get -9 resistances. Also very strong. I think this is from Hunter Influence, yeah. At this point, you want to get as much physical damage taken as elemental as you can. Other than that, the gauntlets didn't really change. This is actually the temple mod. Against burning enemies, you get extra fire damage. I didn't know how to import this, so it's just kind of here. As for boots, it's really nice to get a little bit of faster poison. Always good to have action speed. Get your spell suppression capped. Should still be capped on this version as well, right? Yeah. Also, this is not fake capped, so this is not the kind of capped with Revenge of the Hunted, only if you're at full life, right? So as you can see here, I'm actually, yeah, capped without that. Then Stygian Vice didn't really change, and this didn't change either. At this point, we're going to have Taste of Hate. And then we also have a pretty nifty Thread of Hope. Now, obviously, the main reason for it is to get piercing shots without having to path through here. We don't get anything from projectile damage, right? And then we also get Primeval Force, which is really strong, 50% increased damage for 1 point. One with Nature is nice. The crit even is okay because it makes our LE overload uptime a little better. I also, just to notice, I also take the crit chance here instead of the spell suppression. Even though we're not crit, it just makes it more flexible. You're always going to have your LE overload up. You don't want to wait for like 3 seconds against bosses because that's lost DPS, right? Also a little bit of movement speed, spell suppression. Obviously, you can redo this completely if you don't want to. You can also path over here, get an extra pierce in case you get your spell suppression elsewhere. At League Start, I just really like being spell capped from mostly the tree because then I have to worry less about gearing. Now, skill gems are pretty straightforward. You have Lightning Strike. Now, early, you will want added lightning damage in here. Later, you probably don't need it anymore because you get a lot of flat damage elsewhere. Just check that in POB. Early, you will want Ancestral Call. Later, you don't want it anymore. Now, Unbound Ailments, huge. Multi-Strike, huge. Multi-Strike, I'm not 100% sure. Once again, it doesn't work with Wild Lightning Strike, makes it a little bit worse, but it's like 70% more damage on the poison build, so why not? Vicious Projectiles, you swap out against GMP. And once I have Ancestral Call fixed, right, I get that on the gloves, I can cut Ancestral Recall for elemental damage with attacks. Now, in case you're asking why I'm not using Deadly Ailments, that is mostly because it will screw up my leech rate. So I'm poisoned, so my hits are not that big, but I can still leech if I take Clever Thief and this Mastery here. This Mastery is a game changer for a lot of dot builds. 100% increased total recovery rate for Life Mana Energy Shield. This doesn't help your max leech, right? So for a hit build, this is completely useless. But on a dot build, this is the difference between you reaching leech cap or not. So if I went Deadly Ailments, right, and I get 80% less damage with hits, that would be a catastrophe, so that's why I'm not using it, even though it would be better on POB. Then we have Vol Haste. Obviously, we're not using Haste itself, but we're using Vol Haste, just really nice whenever it's up. Temporal Chains, we're going to cast against bosses. If I have some way to automate it, I might do it later, but it's not really needed. You don't need duration against anything but bosses. 3-second poison duration, nothing should really stand in your way, especially since you have explosions. There's no way anything lives, right? Then we have Grace, Herald of Agony, Purity of Elements. Now, one thing to note about the Herald of Agony is that later I have Divergent. In the early game tree, that is why I go here and I get Poisonous Fangs. If you didn't know, this increased chance to poison is global. It's not just for claws. So this 20% basically makes up for that. But Once you have Herald of Agony, you don't need to do that anymore, because then you get Divergent, and it is another 20% from quality, and then you're good to go. For auras, I take Grace, Purity of Elements. Now, you can go Determination if you really want to, but we will have, like, I think 70 or 80% physical damage taken as Ellie, so I don't think it's necessary. But by all means, if you can get the res elsewhere, it just felt kind of restrictive for League Start, and just being freeze immune, everything without having to take the Pantheon is really strong. Also, people are always talking about the Pantheon, but if you take the Threes Pantheon, you're losing out on the other ones, which are also really strong. For example, reduced damage over time taken. Withering Step, pretty much a no-brainer. We don't have another source of Elusive, so there's no Withering Step nerf for us. Blood Rage, pretty self-explanatory. Welling Blades, faster attacks. And then we also have Blake Bearer with increased AoE. Now, one small mistake here is you definitely want to link both Withering Step and Plague Bearer with increased AoE. As for leveling, since this is not a true and tested build, I'm not going to give you an in-depth build here. If you're a new player, you should not be playing this build. One of the downsides of this build definitely is, like I said, that the first, I don't know, the first 15 to 20 levels are fine, but then from 20 to when you get to Library and you can get Poisonous Concoction, it's a little annoying. This is always a problem with poison builds on Occultist. I did make some Act footage here, though. This is actually from a guide that Tai made on Max Roll, so I'm basically just reenacting this, which is really nice. I modified it a little bit so I don't have to respec as much, but yeah, we're just going through here. We're getting the flask notes for Poisonous Concoction. We're just going to be leveling with Poisonous Concoction right up until we get this dagger right here. I'm probably also going to wait until I have a Tabby and a Lacoste. Poisonous Concoction is just so nice to have, maybe in a Mark of Submission. This is also really good for Poisonous Concoction, by the way. Yeah, I'm just gonna wait a little bit with Lightning Strike, Poisonous Concoction, carry you basically forever. But yeah, as for leveling, should be pretty smooth once you get Poisonous Concoction. I also made some notes. This is more for me, because I'm just really bad at leveling, but I also put this in here in case anybody's interested. Once again, kind of experimental. I just put small notes in here, what you're using at what level, up until level 38. Ascendancies, you go Void Beacon, Withering Presence. You don't really want to go for Explodey first or early, because you don't have anything to apply your curses. You would have to go like Blasphemy or something. You don't need it, right? Only cursed enemies get exploded. Just a little bit iffy. Obviously, when you're leveling, you want to level the added lightning damage so it gets levels, which is huge. Also, get a Val Lightning Strike before you start committing to Lightning Strike at all. It is a game changer. But yeah, that's basically what I will be playing. I will be updating this in the first week. Definitely looking forward to this. I haven't played Explodey League Starter in a while. It is kind of different. One good thing about Occultist in general is that if you're a witch, the world is kind of your oyster this patch. Meaning that if you're a cultist, you can play any poison build, and there's a lot of good poison builds, right? Like even just Poison Conk, you can just stay Poison Conk. You can respec into Cold Dot. If everything fails, maybe like Chaos Dot, if everything fails, you can even respec Ascendancies and go into Elementalist, go every single Ignite build that you want. So I think Witch in general is just a really safe start this patch. Overall, I'm looking forward to maybe getting a Relic with Elemental Overload, and I would be able to cut all of this crap here in between. That would be insane. I guess I'm a little bit on Copium, but that would be pretty cool. Overall, whatever you're playing is what I'm playing. I didn't document too much this time around. I didn't have time to like in-depth test or give you like too much hand-holding. But either way, have a good league start and see ya. That's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do stuff like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, I'm really stoked for this. Haven't had Explodey on League Start in a while. So I can't wait. Also, the league mechanic looks extremely fun. And with a kind of poison skill that's also can be ranged if you wanted to, I think it's going to be pretty nice against the roguelike mechanics. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.